Fluminense's Andre is finally on his way to the Premier League. We've been waiting a long time for this, but it's Wolves his chosen destination for a reported fee of around £20 million. And dare I say it in the first 20 seconds of this podcast, but I think that's the deal of the window. But I think I would have said deal of the window whenever Andre moved. He's that highly rated on the podcast, and we've spoken about him numerous times. And I'm joined by Brazilian expert Peter Pankovski, who we shared what is our bromance sort of came about from Andre when you first
Yeah,
wrote about him, and we've spoke about him ever since. But the deal has finally happened, so we can inform Wolves fans what to expect. His strengths, there's plenty of them, a weakness or two, and his potential fit at Wolves. But Peter, you must be delighted to see him finally earn that move to the Premier League and not spend any more time in Brazil.
yeah, that's why I put on the shirt at the end of the day. But no, in all seriousness, yeah, I think it's a good move for him, actually. I'm surprised when I took a step back a little initially. I was like, what's he going to do with Wolves? There's already got a double pivot there, formed well, but I haven't kind of a second thought about it, and I think it's actually a very smart move on the books. I can get behind it for sure. I'm not buzzing with excitement solely because I wanted him probably in a better environment because I thought he might fit a better team. And this is no disrespect to Wolves. I just feel and this is a good testament to them actually because they could have gotten a really good player for dirt cheap, basically.
Yeah, it's an absolute steal, and I think that's what it is. I think Wolves potentially looking at this as an investment. A lot of big clubs have been linked with him over the last 12, 18 months. Liverpool, the biggest, who probably got quite close at some point last year. But we'll talk about why he hasn't moved as well, because any player over the age of 21 coming from Brazil, a European audience will be like, well, he can't be that good if he's moving across and it's like hasn't been snapped up already. Andre is 23, has over 150 appearances to his name from Fluminense, handful of appearances with the Brazilian national team. He's been called up to the next World Cup qualifiers, highly thought of, lots of experience. But for context as to why he hasn't moved is because, look, Fluminense won the Copa Libertadores last campaign. Their season runs almost from March through to November, so very different to the European season. And Flu were flying under Fernando Diniz last season, and Andre was at the heart of that. And he was almost promised, shall I say, that if he was to stay and help Fluminense win the Libertadores title, that he would be granted his move. And his move looked like it was going to be Fulham, but for some reason there was a lot of back and forth there. And in the end, Fulham moved on to different targets. And it was almost getting a little bit desperate again as to like, is Andre finally going to make this move, or are Fluminense pricing teams out of a potential move? And I think it's hard to say, all right, Fluminense were pricing people out, because if Andre was European, 20, 30 million is an absolute steal. It's only because I think Premier League or European clubs can look at these sort of teams, especially in South America, and try and get them on the cheap. Would have probably looked at players like Danilo, even Joao Gomes, who's moved across to Wolves. Not expensive purchases. So anywhere over 20 million is probably seen as a huge investment. But from where I'm sat, I don't see it. I think Andre has the potential to be world class, and we'll dive into a few of those strengths now. But that's just a little bit of context as to why Andre decided to stay at Fluminense. Played a huge part in winning that Libertadores title. Fluminense have dropped off this season, but I think it's important to say that Andre was injured for at least 2 months of that. Fluminense, during that period, didn't win 10 games. They lost 7, drew 3. And then as soon as Andre was almost thrown back into the side because the Fluminense were somehow in the relegation zone, they won 4, drew 1, and only conceded 1 with Andre starting those games. So I think it shows how important he has been to that system. Peter, I know you're probably as big a fan as I could argue about between that, couldn't we? Who's the biggest fan out of Andre at the moment? But let's just educate Wolves fans as to what they can potentially expect from Andre moving into the system and what he's been doing in Brazil.
Well, feels it does feel like ages ago that I wrote that article, and you just randomly contact me on Twitter, and we started this podcast that we have now, and everything afterwards is history, as people like to say. So yeah, I'm really happy for the move itself because I feel Andre is one that I was so surprised for him stalling and stalling in the move. I think you put it brilliantly because first of all, yes, the year I wrote about him, which was I think a year and a half ago, it was or so, maybe even close to two. He had already promised to stay with Fluminense to try and win the Libertadores title, and actually, when that happened, everybody was dead certain that come on now, like it's January window, he's moving, and then the January window came about. He was linked to Milan at the time, and I think it never materialized. And I think it was also once again linked with Fulham, maybe Liverpool at that point as well. But then Liverpool were also linked in the summer, so it's been kind of brewing in behind the scenes. And I suspect that because other Brazilian players and just other people like other teams and other players start to shine, and the teams look at them, kind of his stocks went down a little bit, and which is why I feel Wolverhampton have done very smart to take advantage of that. Maybe a little too late for my liking, but he will have time to integrate himself. He does have a good kind of friendship group there with Joao Gomes, with the other Portuguese speakers as well. Mateus Cunha is there too, so whether it's native Brazilians or just Portuguese speaking players, he's gonna settle in a little bit easier compared to like any other players that may come about. So that's very good for him. I think it's complex to say what they can expect because it depends on the role he will probably take on. But usually from him, I've always pointed out as in like a classic kind of number six, surprisingly very technical, and for the position that he was deployed at Fluminense, especially when he started shining initially with Deniz's kind of 4-3-3, the great thing about him was he was really tasked with ball carrying as well, and that's kind of improved him a lot on the ball itself, kind of carrying the ball from one end to the other, progressing it further up the pitch, whether it be just laying it off through a pass or just having to move further, come back from even dropping in between the centre backs and just collecting play from deep and then kind of pushing the whole side further. That's something that how do I say it? In Brazil, yes, a lot of that was influenced by Diniz because Diniz is not that's just Diniz's style. It's a lot more build up. It's a lot more kind of Barcelona-esque, if you want to say. But for him to, at that age of 20, tender age of 20, to be tasked with a lot of this and just eventually captain the side and so on, it's just phenomenal. I think it was very impressive to me, and it's why I've kind of been surprised and taken aback by the fact that he just took another, say, year and a half to actually move. Because a lot of teams right now trying to make that transition forward to a more different type of football as it's evolving, and as we see that these types of roles are very essential in football. He kind of he was right there, and I don't think. Okay, I kind of may try to act like an ITK here and say that yes, Fluminense have actually known that they have a very good player on their hands and have kind of priced him out of a certain move. And with time, with the asset kind of losing its value, certain teams wanted to pay less, whilst Fluminense still demanded a big fee. Maybe that's kind of affected it. But at the same time, I feel an extra risk of 5 million. Yes, some teams may not afford it, some teams may do. It wouldn't have hurt because he's just that good of a player. And with Wolves especially, I'm happy to see how he forms, especially because I feel like Joao Gomes, as much as he's a very defensively oriented player, I feel he's better off as a slightly more defensive box to box midfielder compared to actually being kind of the defensive midfielder at hand. He's a little too rash and a little too kind of eager to get further forward compared to Andre, as much as Andre can do it himself as well. And I feel that's why he's going to be a good fit there. That's why I think Wolves have looked into it.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, he's that quarterback role. He wants to take the ball off
Yeah,
the keeper. He drops in almost like what Steven Gerrard did at Liverpool. He wants to take charge of situations. And even looking at when they won the Libertadores last campaign, the big names he was playing alongside, like he was demanding the ball off Marcelo, for example, to be like, I'm going to be the person here to transition it in the first zone. I think the perfect way to describe him is that first phase specialist. I know it's a mouthful, but I like it in terms of picking up the ball, transitioning it up with the pitch. And his passing stats have always been so high, and people can look at it and say, well, he's a number six, or he's going to be going side to side. And you've touched on it already. Playing under Fernando Diniz, it was very sort of chaotic football, but Andre was at the heart of that. It was his responsibility to collect the ball off the keeper, the centre back, full back, transition the ball up the pitch as far as he could, but then look to play those line breaking passes. He was always looking to progress the ball forward. Always, you can phrase it in the way of the assist before the assist. So never really getting on the goal contributions, but obviously that's not his role. But just advancing the ball into dangerous areas and picking out the right players, and for his stats to be as high as what they are for that role is incredibly impressive. Now, you can't really touch too much on this season's because he's been injured for a good 6 week period of that, and Fluminense have been a completely different side. But in the Libertadores last season, his passing rate was the highest throughout the competition of any player. And you can argue that the Libertadores, yes, it has teams from Chile, Peru, etc. within it, but it's such a demanding tournament, and Brazilian teams playing every 3 or 4 days. And Andre never really dropped out of that. He hasn't really had too many injuries over his career over the last 4 or 5 years. So just because if Wolves fans see that he's been injured for the last 2 months, I'm just going to just get rid of those rumours straight away. Like, it's rare for him to be injured. I think there's been an awful lot going on, and he had a huge campaign last season, but he's come back refreshed and picked up that role again in a different side since Fernando Diniz has moved on in the last 2 or 3 months. And under the new manager, so chaotic football under Diniz, which Andre embraced, but under the new head coach, he's been having to play a slightly more disciplined role, but he's so calm on the ball. He's this perfect leader for his age. He's because he has over 150 appearances, and I think he knows how good he is and how important he is for that Fluminense side. He doesn't have an ego with it as well. He just trusts himself. He may appear a little bit lethargic on the ball, but he's very quick to be agile and move away from defenders and progress up the pitch. And I think what is an ideal time to bring up now, we've touched upon Joao Gomes a couple of times, and I think it will be a good fit, which we'll talk about very soon. But with Andre, a lot of people are always looking for a negative, aren't they? If someone's not being picked up
Yeah.
straight away, they're like, well, what's the fault here? And everyone sort of picked up on his size. And I actually looked and compared him to Joao Gomez, and he's the exact same size there. And there was never any sort of complaints when Gomez moved across, and there hasn't been many from what I've heard or seen of him in the Premier League too. But he's strong, isn't he? He's really strong on the ball. You won't see him thrown off. Backs himself to progress the ball up the pitch, happy to take it in dangerous areas. And I think that is a quality which will be overlooked and underrated moving to the Premier League, where everyone will potentially say, look, Brazilian football is a lot less, more lethargic and not as good or not as fast paced as the Premier League. But the way Denis set his team up and where Andre really shone and came to life was picking the ball up in those tight areas, progressing it, 1-2 passes, but progressive up the pitch, not just backwards or safety. And in the Premier League, where he's going to have probably even less time on the ball, I think that has naturally prepared him for the Premier League. And this is why hopefully people can see from us talking about Andre and what we've previously said about him on multiple podcasts on the Copper Club. He's tailor-made for the Premier League. And the fact that now Brazil are eyeing him up to move into that number six role. Yes, the Brazilian national team is in a little bit of a crisis at the moment, but they're turning to Andre to lead the charge in the middle of the pack for them. So Wolves are signing Brazil's next number six for £20 million. And he's moving into a team, as you've said, with a contingency of Brazilian players or Portuguese speaking players, which is a really nice environment for him to learn his trade. I can see Andre in the next 12, 18 months being sold or being identified by a top four, top six club for double, triple that fee quite easily. And I think a lot of Premier League teams or scouts will be embarrassed that they've not picked him up, and they've almost been playing hardball over that extra £5-10 million, which will end up being pocket change from where I'm sat. So I've tried to take my Andre goggles off and look for another weakness in terms of his potential height. but the way in which he reads the game and his positioning sort of counteracts that weakness. And I can't really see any other faults with it, to be honest. Yes, there'll be that adjustment period. But Peter, I'm intrigued to know if you have, and if the answer is no, then we can progress on to the next part of the podcast. But I just can't see any major weaknesses for him. And I think Wolves have picked up the best number 6 available on the market, not only in South America, but also probably Europe as well.
Yeah, to be honest, I agree. To be honest, I agree because I feel we've drummed up Andre for some time now, and as we've already said it right here, we don't need to. I don't need to delve too much into it again. Just he's he's a very good modern day number 6. I said it in my article. I can't go back on my words now. He's a very good modern day number 6, and as you said, he's bulky, shoots the ball well. He's not someone that, despite his small stature, kind of can be shrugged off the ball and just he'll take his time to settle in a more physical and fast-paced league, yes, but it won't take that much time. He won't need. We're not looking at a player that will need a loan for 12 months, say, or like he won't settle in by 2, 3 months, and then you're looking at how you can, like a 20 mil void. Like Andre is the real deal in terms of, as I said, modern day number 6. That's grabbing him for 20 million pounds is a fantastic deal by Wolves. Like it's just I can't even begin to explain how good that deal is for them and why it makes sense. It makes sense because, and we're probably going to move on to this, so I can just
Yeah, let's
might as
talk
well
about it
lean
now.
into it.
We'll talk about the
It's
field.
just all you have to do is just look at that Chelsea game and realize that two players of the same nature, give or take, of course, but both Mario Lemina and Joao Gomes are players that aren't exactly used to sitting in front of a defense. Like Joao Gomes, I've watched him enough in Wolves, dare I say, and of course I've watched him enough at Flamengo when he was there. He's to me, he's just not like a pure defensive midfielder. Same goes for Mario Lemina. Both I like both actually. Like for the level they play at, I like both. I think they're very solid players, but it just doesn't feel like a natural defensive midfielder. And if you want to form a midfield pivot, yes, obviously, I do not agree that perhaps Joao Gomes and Andre will fit together just because of size, unless you compensate from somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, you need size in your squad. Like set pieces are not going to defend themselves, but in terms of like a natural fit in that midfield, whether you form a midfield three, whether you form a back three and that's your pivot, so you compensate from somewhere else, as I mentioned, those two, especially Andre Joao Gomes, can form a phenomenal partnership that covers enormous amounts of space and can hold a very good structure and have a holding midfielder in front of someone who covers even more ground. Because Andre, for like we've done him all this talk about a 6 and how he can progress the ball, but he's not a like slow pace player. He's not someone that can get bypassed and then he can't recover. No, he has vast amount of recovery pace, a lot of awareness and spatial awareness as to what he needs to do on the field. And when you combine those two with someone like, say, when Joao Gomes or be it Mario Lemina, it doesn't really matter to me, to be honest. You have kind of a good enough connection between the two, and I feel that's all you need. Like Wolves right now don't have the budget and don't have the perfect situation to actually be picky about something like this. Hence why I feel you've got Andre through the door, bed him in as quick as possible, and then you have one of the best midfielders as well. Maybe England is a long shot, but like you could easily say that for the bottom half of the top 10, it's one of the best midfields, alongside maybe someone like Crystal Palace, for example.
I want to touch on, as you said there, in terms of his pace, because a few people messaged me on Twitter last night saying that they thought he was slow, which I thought was ridiculous, because in
Not at
Denise's
all.
setup, absolutely, yeah, in Denise's setup, where Andre was sort of trusted to transition the ball and play those dangerous passes, not all of them would work, which meant that with pushing their team up, Andre was the player who had to burst back and was trusted to win the ball back. And then he was the heart of it to start the attacks again. So Wolves fans may look at his yellow card rate and think it's a little bit high, but I'd say look beyond that. Look at the responsibility Denise gave him was quite unfamiliar in football. And also this is Brazilian football as well, where yellow cards are sort of brandished here, there and everywhere. So I think that was perfect to sort of just bring up within that part. But I'm of you. I'm really intrigued to see how Joe Gomez and Andre will complement each other. I think Gomez has shown glimpses of how he can be that box to box player. So maybe having Andre sit there, because I think, and not to focus just on one game too much, but that Chelsea game, they were lacking somebody there to know where to sit, block the balls. There was no real presence there. Gomez and Lamina were all at sea at times. So whether you move it into a three-man midfield, as you sort of touched upon there, because maybe the height element, as you said, with Gomez and Andre being both 1.76 meters, that could cause its own problems. But Wolves have clearly identified it. There's something which can work there, and I honestly think with Andre signing, whether that, as we're speaking live here on the podcast on Thursday, the day before the window sort of slams shut, I think Andre is Wolves' best player. So whether that means Lamina's throwing out the side, and I know you said there you rated both of them, and I can't admit to watching Wolves week in, week out, but you have to make room for him somewhere. Maybe that high element is why they'll have to go for a three-man midfield, but it'll be really interesting to see. But Andre's adaptable. He can play in that five-man midfield. He can play in the two. And I think just allowing him to sit there and let Gomez do his thing and progress with the pitch, if Wolves are caught out, it's not like Andre is going to be in a role he doesn't know or doesn't recognise, because he's been doing that for Fluminense.
Yeah.
So I think this, as we speak about it more and more, like, I think, look, fair play to Wolves. This has been a fantastic investment. But it just seems to make a lot of sense. Wolves need a calm head in the middle. Andre needs to come across and learn his trade. And 12 months in the Premier League, look, Joao Gomes was linked to bigger and better clubs. And I don't think he had. I think he's been solid. Don't get me
So
wrong.
was Danilo. So was Danilo. If you remember, so was Danilo. He was initially linked with Arsenal. So
yeah, 100%.
and even now, I can argue that, like, if any top side picks up, whether it's Danilo, whether it's Joao Gomes, not for starter material perhaps, but they can easily do a very solid job at any side right now. Like, whether it's Man City or it's a Chelsea, because, well, Chelsea are ups and downs consistently. They'll do a solid job. So that goes to show just how good they can be, and they're not coming for like £50 million. So,
and I think it's worth reiterating that, look, we'll have a lot of Wolves fans hopefully listen to this podcast who have never tuned into the Copper Club before, and we're not a shouty podcast. We're not the guys to sort of claim these players are the next best thing in order to get hits. We're very honest. It's just, I think Andre's been the player we've been most excited about, and he's been tailor-made for the Premier League for a long period of time now. But you could argue he's moving across at the right time. So many appearances under his name, established himself as the best player in that role in Brazil, moving into the Brazilian national team. If he wants to keep his place there, he has to be in a Premier League environment. And Wolves are in a position where they need someone like him. So it ticks a lot of boxes for me. And I'm really excited to see how he gets on. Peter, look, I really appreciate your time once again. If you have enjoyed the podcast, we are here throughout the year, not just the transfer windows. So do subscribe to us across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'll be analysing all the players who we really like, who we think that can transition from South America to Europe. So look, once again, Peter, thanks for your time. And Wolves fans, you have one hell of a player on your hands.